Hello, this video is essentially a rebuke. Is that the right word? It's maybe a criticism of a video that was released by a YouTuber called Sheev Talks. Now, bear with me if my microphone sounds awful. I'm using my laptop's microphone. I normally use a proper microphone, but I don't have it with me at the moment because I'm staying with my parents. But that aside, I get straight into it. This video is a rebuke, as I said, of a video released by a YouTuber called Sheev Talks that essentially was a criticism of the Attack of the Clones, which is the second Star Wars movie in chronological order. It's the second of the prequels, and though I agree with a lot of the points, and though I don't think it's a perfect movie, I definitely don't think it's the worst Star Wars movie, and in fact, I would go as far as to say it's one of the best Star Wars movies, and I'm going to explain why, and I'm going to explain why I think some of the points he made were not necessarily great, and there are some things he sort of glossed over. So he starts the video by, one of the early critiques anyway in his video is of Padme, and how the whole bounty hunter operation to try and kill her was a bit stupid because there were about 4 chains to get to her. So I think it was essentially Emperor Palpatine to hired Count Dooku, who hired Jango Fett, who hired Zam Wesell, who hired or used a droid which used some aliens to kill Padme, or to attempt to kill Padme. He criticises this by saying that it's kind of stupid that you'd use that many chains to try and assassinate someone. Now, this is a really bad criticism because, to me anyway, it's obvious that if you were to assassinate someone, you should use as many chains as possible to detach yourself from the incident as far as possible. That's exactly what happens, and it ends up working. Obi-Wan Kenobi manages to trace it back all the way to Count Dooku via Jango Fett. Not quite to Palpatine, but he only does that because he stumbles across some intel from Dex. And by the way, the intel he gets, I get how that's plot armor, and that was another one of Sheev's criticisms was how the heck did Dex happen to know about this poison dart from a remote planet that no one knows about? It's a valid criticism, but movies are full of plot armor and coincidences like that. I'm not condoning it. Well, actually, you know what? I am condoning it, and this is a big general criticism I have of Sheev's videos. He often claims that coincidences are bad writing, but I think you need a certain amount of coincidences in any movie to make it interesting. Otherwise, the movie would be so boring. It would be hours and hours and hours of a back and forth of uninteresting events that happen because there aren't any coincidences, if you get what I'm trying to say. I'll explain that later, but on this main point, So Obi-Wan Kenobi stumbles across the knowledge. Fair enough, that's a bit annoying, but I don't think you should critique that too heavily. I think it forwards the story. I think it's possible that Dex, this guy who's had a lot of experience in the universe and seems to know a lot about everything, it's possible that he would have some knowledge about this poison dart. The use of the poison dart, fair enough, was a bit silly from Jango Fett. Could he just have killed Zam Wesell with his blaster or something? Yeah, certainly. Could he have even killed the Jedi? Possibly. I mean, that wasn't what he was hired to do, but it's possible. So fair enough with that criticism. But the bigger picture being that there's this chain of assassins, which I think is a perfectly reasonable thing for Emperor Palpatine ultimately to do, to try and kill Padme, to try and detach himself from it as much as possible, as I said. I think it actually makes for a really interesting story as well, because you get this whole thing where Obi-Wan Kenobi's playing detective, you get to learn about a new planet, Kamino, the clone operation, which, by the way, ultimately was part of Emperor Palpatine's plan, right? This is something Sheev completely misses. His plan was for Obi-Wan Kenobi to track Jango Fett back to Kamino to find out about the clone army and to kickstart the war. Sheev then goes on to complain about how the Palpatine's strategy isn't very clear and it doesn't really make sense. The long and short of it is that Palpatine hires Count Dooku to play bad guy against the Republic and start this war of separatists versus Republic clones against droids, right? And he uses him as a pawn to start a war and ultimately to turn the clones against the Jedis and to create the Empire. And I guess the criticism is, why would Count Dooku agree to that? I guess. But as Sheev himself said, Dooku was caught between a rock and a hard place. He didn't really have any other choice. He could see the power of the Emperor, and he could see the threat of the Jedis, who he didn't agree with. His get out of jail free card, so to speak, was to secretly tell Obi-Wan Kenobi about this without the Chancellor knowing, and to try and stop the Emperor from gaining ultimate control by joining sides with Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I suppose ultimately to help the Separatists rule the galaxy instead of Palpatine. So that makes perfect sense to me. I think Sheev criticised the political side of Padme's involvement in it all, and how would Padme have guessed that Count Dooku was the one who tried to assassinate her. It seems like a bit of a pot shot that just forwarded the story along. That criticism, fair enough, but like I say, movies are full of these small coincidences. I'm not necessarily condoning them, but they forward the story. I think that is a poor example of one, to be fair. I think there are some arguments that try to defend this, as Sheev himself said, they don't really add up. So, other than that, my main thing with Sheev, though, is he completely overlooks the good parts of the movie, which, in my opinion, is the action. The battle on Geonosis was very, very cool. It was cool as a kid. I've rewatched it so many times as an adult. It's cool now as well. I think there's you get introduced to a lot of new interesting droids, the clones themselves, which are very cool. It kickstarts the Clone Wars, of course. I think it does a good job of doing that, of kickstarting the Clone Wars, of creating the war. It makes sense to me, as I've said. Jango Fett is one of the best bounty hunters ever seen in Star Wars. Introduces him very well. The fight, by the way, between Obi-Wan and Jango Fett is exactly what we want from Star Wars, right? We've seen so many Jedi on Jedi or Jedi on Sith fights, and it does get a bit repetitive. You see one in every single Star Wars movie. What you don't see a lot of is a Jedi versus a bounty hunter, or a Jedi versus any other character for that matter that puts up a decent fight. Now, we know from canon that Jango Fett is a serious Jedi hunter. I think he's killed 12 Jedi canonically in his career. So it makes sense for him to be able to put up a really good fight against Obi-Wan, and ultimately leads in him being defeated and having to flee. Obi-Wan manages to put a tracker on his ship, which is a perfect introduction to the planet Geonosis. Speaking of which, another criticism Sheev had was of the droid factory scene itself. He found it to be a bit unnecessary and long-winded. Again, I think he's wrong here because it introduces the capture of Anakin and Padme perfectly, in my opinion. They try to save Obi-Wan, they get caught up in this mess. Sure, the factory scenes might be a bit long, but I think they're fun. I think C-3PO and R2-D2's involvements are funny and fun. I remember Sheev saying that he thought the whole droid C-3PO swap thing was just boring and lazy and not funny to kids at all. I found it funny as a kid. I still do. I think a lot of other people do. And their involvement in the arena was pretty cool as well, in my opinion. So yeah, that Anakin's capture ultimately leads to this final battle, right? Of the Jedi being forced to come to Geonosis, free them, and have this massive battle, which is very fun and very cool. You get to see a load of Jedi for the first time, really. Characters like Kit Fisto we don't see again. Well, briefly in Revenge of the Sith, but we all know what happened there. You see again Jango Fett being involved. The introduction of super battle droids, and then that on top of the lightsaber duel which we have at the end. Now, I know I said we see too many lightsaber duels, but this one is unique in that you see not just a lightsaber fight, but a force battle at the end, which, to his credit, Sheev actually says is really good, and it is good. You see, okay, I've had to re-record this part because initially I criticised Sheev for criticising the final lightsaber battle at the end of the movie, specifically that the lightsaber part of it was not good, rather than the force fighting side of it. I rewatched Sheev's criticism of Attack of the Clones, and I realised that that's not actually fair. He didn't say that. He said that he thought the lightsaber fight was actually pretty good, or at least the mere fact that Yoda uses a lightsaber makes sense. And that's something that a lot of fans criticised when the movie came out, and still do criticise. Oh no, but Yoda's supposed to be this old, wise general who's mystical and cool and powerful. Yes, but it wouldn't make sense that he hadn't trained with a lightsaber because every other Jedi had, and so why should he be the exception of that rule? Right? There's plenty else wrong with this idea that he shouldn't use a lightsaber, which, to be fair, to his credit, Sheev covered, so highly recommend you go and watch his video. But he claims that it's executed poorly, that the fact that Yoda's jumping around like a frog is silly and not cool. I strongly disagree, and this may be because I first watched these movies as a kid, so I thought it was kind of cooler than it actually is, but I still get goosebumps when I see Yoda drop his cane and sort of force pull his lightsaber into his hand and ignite it. Still gives me goosebumps. The soundtrack's really cool. I think the fight itself is the second best Star Wars lightsaber fight we've ever seen, after Anakin versus Obi-Wan. Anakin versus Obi-Wan? No, that is a good fight in Revenge of the Sith, but I think Duel of the Fates is the best. I guess that's the soundtrack, not the actual fight, but the fight I mean is Darth Maul versus Obi-Wan versus Qui-Gon Jinn in The Phantom Menace. So, yes, I will reinstate though that the new force powers that are used as well, I think are really cool. Now, Sheev does criticise that there isn't enough of this, that there isn't enough playing with the force, so to speak, in the force battle side of Dooku versus Yoda, and the only cool part is where Yoda sort of absorbs the lightning and deflects it in a sort of defensive manner, as every Jedi should, showing how powerful he is, by the way, because not even Obi-Wan was able to do that, or Mace Windu in the third movie, so that's a cool detail to note, which, yes, I agree, that's very cool, that part of the movie, but I think they did sufficient else. Yoda caught parts of the roof and had to throw them to the side, which again Sheev criticises. He thinks it's not cool enough, I guess, but I think it makes perfect sense that Dooku wants to test Yoda's force ability and whether he still sort of had it, I guess. What else do you want, I guess? Dooku could have created a fireball out of thin air and projected it towards Yoda. maybe, sure. I thought it was sufficient. I thought it was really cool. I thought everything that Yoda did was defensive, and everything that Dooku did was offensive, or at the very least, used it as distraction. Because, by the way, pretty genius how he chucked a pole over, or a not a pole, a pillar, I guess, or some kind of beam over Anakin and Obi-Wan, knowing that Yoda would catch it and let him get away, because he realizes that he can't defeat Yoda any other way. I thought that was really well written. He sort of fled like a coward by using a distraction because he was outplayed by Yoda. Another criticism Sheev had was that Yoda looked really bad. He looked nowhere near as good as the original trilogy or Revenge of the Sith. I have to push back against this. I think he looked just as good as Revenge of the Sith and arguably better than the original trilogy. I hate this modern obsession people have with puppetry and that everything has to be puppetry and CGI is from the devil. It just isn't. As long as it's done well, as we've seen from Davy Jones, for example, just released not too long after this film, uh, it can really add to a movie. It can save a lot of production time and money from not needing puppetry. And you can do things with CGI that you can't do with puppetry, like the whole Yoda flipping and jumping around. And even when puppetry is used in modern movies, they have to supplement it with elements of CGI as well for those scenes that need it. So I think it can be done well. I think it's an art form that's degraded over time significantly, but I don't think that means that it can't be done well. As I say, we've seen it done to an elite level in 2008 with Davy Jones, and so if enough money and time is given to a CGI studio, I don't see why it can't be done. So I think that's a pretty baseless criticism. The rest of Sheev's criticism, from what I remember, I tend to agree with, but no Star Wars movie is free from criticism, and therefore come to the conclusion that this movie is one of the best, if not the best, Star Wars movies of all time. I'll add to that by saying the the fight between Jango Fett and Obi-Wan Kenobi is insanely cool. The Sonic, what they called, the Sonic bomb thing that Jango Fett uses, that has one of the coolest sound effects ever. His twin lasers from the front of his ship also have an insanely cool sound effect, and his blasters themselves. I saw this top 10 sound effects of Star Wars of all time, and that's a big part of Star Wars, right? Sound effects. It's one of the reasons kids love it. It's one of the reasons adults think it's so cool. The sound effects make a lot of the movie. And the top two sound effects were Jango Fett's blaster and his Sonic bombs, which still hold up today. There was a bit of fan service, which I loved from The Mandalorian, in which Slave One, I can't remember, is it Jango, is it Mandalorian or Boba Fett who's piloting it? I can't remember, but I think it's the Mandalorian and he uses or is it Boba Fett? Maybe it's Boba and he uses those bombs to full effect. And then I think the final criticism that I would push back on is the Tusken Raider thing. Sheev claims that Padme should have been disgusted by Anakin slaughtering the Tusken Raiders. Now, I know he made a subsequent video after this, which also pushed back on a lot of people who pushed back on him for the Tusken Raider criticism and condoned it. What I would say is this: Padme's within her rights to at least understand why Anakin was upset and did what he did. The Tusken Raiders did torture his mother. In every clip we've seen thus far of the Tusken Raiders, they were seen as these oppressive savages who, shot people with their sniper rifles for sport. They tried to attack Luke for no reason at all and failed, but they tried to slaughter him. It seems to me that they are these mindless savages who just try to attack anyone for sport and don't have any real intelligence or morality behind them, akin to an animal, and that is why Anakin calls them animals. It's not like they're some human tribe that deserve a high level of, you know, moral respect. I suppose they are savages, and he treated them like savages. And the reason he was so angry and upset was because it's a difficult thing to do, to slaughter a tribe of savages, because they contain women and children, and that's where your emotions kick in. But he did the right thing in his eyes. Padme could understand it. Quite frankly, I can understand it on a moral level. And I think the Book of Boba Fett has done a terrible job in like trying to humanize the Tuskens and to make them these sort of morally grey, at the very least, teddy bears who are just trying, like, indigenous population, are just trying to defend their land. They're not humans, as far as we know. They are savages, and they should be treated as such. So I've retrospectively added in an extra paragraph to really hammer home this point, because it's one of the main points I disagree with. Now, this is scripted. This is the only part of this video that is scripted, but just to make you aware, if you think it seems a bit or sounds a bit different to the rest of the rest of the video was in a sort of off-the-cuff, non-scripted style. This part is scripted. To be clear, Sheev claims that it is unbelievable that Padme didn't fall out of love with Anakin after this event. I'm not saying that this event was not pivotal in leading Anakin to the dark side. However, I'm also not agreeing with Sheev's point that it was completely unjustified, considering the Tuskens are not even human and are portrayed as complete savages up until this point. Just because they run around like humans does not mean that they have any equal moral stake or intelligence. I'm not going to get into the ethics of animal slaughter, but I'm sure Sheev would view the slaughter of a hornet's nest, women and children included, in a similar vein to how I view this event. This part is off the cuff, but I've just had an extra thought on top of this. We have this weird thing in human, I guess in the way our brains work or have evolved, where we view mammals as somehow like morally and ethically more worthy than any other creatures, just because they are more similar to humans, right? I believe that's how we've evolved. I don't think there's any weight at all in a cow, for example, having more importance than a spider, and yet we would kill a spider much more easily than a cow, for example. So that's something worth considering when you realise how similar structurally and biologically Tuskens are to humans. But let me tell you again, they are not humans. I was going to end the video here, but I realised that I didn't really support many of the criticisms that Sheev had. I supported some of them, but there is one more major criticism that I do support. And by the way, this doesn't mean that I now no longer believe that this is the best or one of the best Star Wars movies. I still believe that, as I said before. I think no Star Wars movie is free from criticism. This is a big one, with particularly this episode and the following. And I think a lot of people that grew up with these films and now are sort of getting older are blinded by nostalgia with this particular aspect. I've seen a lot of YouTube videos defending this point, which really doesn't need defending, and it's that the acting is awful. Ewan McGregor, Hayden Christensen, Natalie Portman, as much as I love them, for what they've done in Hollywood and in many films, the acting is awful in these films, and it's partially the writing from George Lucas. I get that, but I also do think the acting is really bad. Could anyone else have done it much better? They definitely could have, but then, of course, you wouldn't have the same nostalgia that we have now for those characters. And I guess they embodied the characters quite well. I don't know. There's something about the acting that's off-putting. I think particularly with Hayden Christensen. And yeah, like I say, the writing, like the infamous "I hate sand" line and all of that is awful. But I just thought I'd add that as a caveat in at the end. It's it doesn't take anything away from the points I've raised about, the action being phenomenal, the writing of the story itself being phenomenal. Just because it's overly complicated, I think was Sheev's phrase, doesn't mean it's bad. He himself said that even children are able to understand pretty advanced plots and stories, and he finds it disrespectful when writers oversimplify stories for the sake of children understanding more easily. So I think that's a pretty hypocritical criticism from him. So, but that is the end of my video. I'd love to know what you guys think in the comments below. This is my first ever YouTube video, so if you could give me any tips in the comments as well, that would be great. This is all just off the cuff. I didn't have a script or anything, so sorry if it was a bit, I don't know, not great. But yeah, let me know what you think. And I would love for Sheev to see this video one day to ultimately make a pushback on this video if he, but who knows. All right, thanks guys, bye.